I don't believe the Israeli forces have got anything like that long in order to conduct this campaign. There will be pressure on them to sign a ceasefire, including from the United States at some point. They do have every right to defend themselves. They do have every right to go in and try and take out those Hamas leaders and militiamen who took part in these terrible atrocities. But they do, I think, realize themselves. I've worked with Israeli security forces, the Mossad, and so on over my career. They are very realistic people, and they know what can be achieved and what can't be achieved. You can kill an individual, you can't kill an idea.
Let's just pick up on those comments, first of all, from Antonio Gutierrez. You're a former UK ambassador to the UN. Do you think Gutierrez was misrepresented? He didn't apologise, should he?
Look, he's made a further statement today, I believe, in which he has reiterated his condemnation of the terrible Hamas atrocities on the 7th of October. No one can justify the actions by Hamas at all, and I don't think Antonio Guterres tried to do that. The difficulty in this is that Hamas is a terrorist organization, but it's not just a terrorist organization. There's a sort of political side to Hamas as well, and I think the Secretary General was trying to express in a minefield, frankly, for any commentator on this, was trying to set the wider context as well as the horrors at the specific atrocities carried out by Hamas 2 weeks ago.
I think many Israelis would say, well, what else could he mean if he says, as he did, that the Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation? That is a pretty clear statement as to what he thinks Palestinian people have experienced under Israel. Surely that was going a step too far.
I'm not here to justify or excuse anything that may have been said by the Secretary General or his critics. He has a very difficult job. He has to represent global opinion. He did very clearly condemn the Hamas attacks. I heard him. I've read what he said. There is also, of course, a strong sentiment, especially in the Arab world, but also across the whole global South, that is critical of the West generally, and in this context sees Israel as part of the West, and that the Palestinians are part of the global South, and it's where the sort of two come together, and perceptions of what's happened can vary. I mean, I don't think anyone can get away from the sheer horrors of what happened on the 7th of October, utterly unjustifiable on any basis whatsoever. At the same time, you can still have sympathy with the Palestinian people and recognize that their lack of any statehood, the very grim conditions in which they live in Gaza, is something which has to be addressed.
Do you think this, and I'll make this the last question on this, do you think the UN Secretary General's misunderstood the sensitivities here? Or, and you'd understand why, given the pressure that they're under, Israel are perhaps being a bit oversensitive, denying UN staff visas, for example?
Well, I think we can all understand why the Israelis should be so sensitive at this time. And I think one of the successes of the Biden administration, of many European leaders, including Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, is to show very strong sympathies with the Israelis in public in order to deliver harder messages in private. It's tougher for the UN to do that. Guterres hasn't been able to talk to the Israeli leaders. They've refused to take his phone calls even before this latest row. So there is an antipathy from the Israeli side towards the United Nations, which I think the latest exchanges have only amplified.
The much threatened Israeli ground invasion's yet to start. Given how compact Gaza is, how would that ground invasion work while ensuring that hostages held by Hamas are safe and are liberated?
Well, the Israelis have got a number of different priorities in here. They want to destroy Hamas. That's their declared goal by Prime Minister Netanyahu. They want to rescue hostages. They are their own people, as well as a number of dual nationals in there. And Israelis have suffered enough without losing more of their people in this latest twist and ghastly turn of the Middle East issue. They need to respect humanitarian law, international law of conflict, which is it's very difficult in an urban area, and humanitarian relief needs to get through to the Palestinian people. It's going to be very difficult for them, and that's why I say I think it's very difficult for Hamas to be wiped out by the Israelis. They are a military force, and you can kill individual militiamen or their commanders. You can't kill an idea quite so easily. And Hamas does have a political base in Gaza. And even if the current leadership of Hamas are crushed and destroyed, a new one is likely to spring up in its place. So there has to be some form of longer term plan beyond the next few weeks of military engagement that addresses the needs of the over 2 million people who live in Gaza, helps them get back to the essentials of life, of shelter and food and water and power and so on. But just as importantly, opens up a political process which can address this long-standing issue, which has been rumbling since the end of the 1940s, of how you find a secure state of Israel and a fair and just settlement for the Palestinians alongside that secure state of Israel.
It's a very tough ask, isn't it, when we consider that Israel is intent on eradicating Hamas. But if they do that, you're also talking about totally destroying much of Gaza. And if you do that, then its inhabitants, many of whom are young men, a large proportion, are going to potentially be radicalized. And it allows for other state actors to move in to replace Hamas. Can you do that? Can you eradicate Hamas
Well,
and not disaffect Gaza, or not? I mean, it seems quite naive of Israel to want to eliminate Hamas and then not expect, even if it's another war, to spring up in its place. Do you know what I mean?
well, Kate, urban warfare is very, very difficult to prosecute. We've seen in the last 2 decades, we've seen the Grozny completely flattened in order to destroy a Chechen urban resistance. We've seen Aleppo completely destroyed by the Syrian army. We've seen Mariupol just last year destroyed by the Russians in Ukraine. The only time that someone has attempted to do this within the rule of law, to take over a major city in which the insurgents have got control, was in Mosul in Iraq in the late 2000s. And there, it took the US-led forces 9 months to do this within the broad framework of the rule of law. And even then, 11,000 civilians died. I don't believe the Israeli forces have got anything like that long in order to conduct this campaign. There will be pressure on them to sign a ceasefire, including from the United States at some point. They do have every right to defend themselves. They do have every right to go in and try and take out those Hamas leaders and militiamen who took part in these terrible atrocities. But they do, I think, realize themselves. I've worked with Israeli security forces, the Mossad, and so on over my career. They are very realistic people, and they know what can be achieved and what can't be achieved. You can kill an individual, you can't kill an idea.
Have the Israelis exhausted all the intelligence options that they have before putting boots on the ground, do you believe?
Well, intelligence is merely a means of informing you as to what military options might be available and how to go about those military options in the best possible way. It's not in itself a means of taking on an enemy. It is a part of the framework which helps you carry out a successful operation. So I wouldn't see intelligence in quite that context. Clearly, the Israelis suffered an intelligence failure. They didn't know that this attack was going to take place. I think very few people actually outside Gaza knew about it. It seems that Hezbollah and Hezbollah and the Iranians, allies of Hamas, were also surprised at the timing of this. And that's, Hamas have been very careful to keep this deeply secret. So the Israelis are learning from this. We all learn from intelligence failures. I think they will be trying to shape their military operations in a way which maximizes the damage they do to Hamas's military structures. They will know that there is a limit to what they can actually achieve.
Yeah, and I'm really talking about intelligence there, insofar as so far I understand that there have been very small ground incursions in Gaza. There have been small pockets of Israeli military operating in Gaza on intelligence, to try and help the hostage situation, but also B, to try and make targeting Hamas operatives more specific rather than big, um, uh, airborne strikes to use on the ground intelligence in that way instead. And I suppose I'm asking whether there's any way that the ground incursion can be delayed if the Israelis accept that actually there'll be less collateral damage if they use intelligence and small pockets of boots on the ground to eliminate Hamas instead, without the expense of several more thousand Palestinian lives.
Well, I'm not privy to debates inside the Israeli war cabinet. We had expected that the ground offensive would have started before now. It clearly has been held back. I think there are a mix of factors in there. One is the desire to keep up the pressure for the release of hostages, and some small progress has been made. I think greater progress might be possible. And also, the Israelis need to work out exactly what their war aims are from the ground offensive, what it is they're trying to achieve, and on what basis would they then later withdraw. I do think that they will be building up a much better intelligence picture of what's going on. The details of the underground network of tunnels, which are so essential for Hamas's communication and keeping everything they have secret. So the Israelis will be gradually building that up. But I think we have to expect that at some stage there will be more significant ground incursions on search and destroy missions into Gaza than we've seen so far.